Thank you for tuning in to an episode of Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Darren Evans. He is the CEO and founder of AfterCloud, which is a digital media vault or app, I suppose, how you describe it, where people can use to celebrate occasions, record family history. And his work comes from a deeply rooted loss in his life. And we'll get more into that. But welcome, Darren. Thank you for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Victoria. Good to be here. Thank you.
So let's start there. Tell us about the work that you do.
My work is fairly recent. It sort of, to answer your question about AfterCloud, it's a bit of both. It's an app currently with a view to being a platform. And what it does is it helps people to capture their moments in multiple content types to create that moment. Right now, actually, it's being used in dementia-related services, in hospice care, older people's services as well, and predominantly around activity types. So as an example, if you've got an art therapist or a music therapist or a therapist providing services, it allows them to capture those moments so that the individual can share those moments with family in a closed group setting. So that's ultimately what it does. It also has the ability to future post, so potentially posthumous postings. So that's essentially what AfterCloud is. But the journey for us started really when my mother-in-law passed away 2 years ago. We were actually working on another app at the time, which was essentially a digital advent calendar. So it was my wife's idea. I can't take credit or responsibility for it. It was my wife's idea that she wanted to do something for her sister's 50th birthday, I think it was at the time. So, and we looked around, there was nothing really much available. So we started to develop this app. But at the same time, we were caring for my mother-in-law who had this very aggressive form of Lewy body dementia. And she died from it. It was very, as I say, very aggressive. And my son, who was 11 at the time, said to us, can't we do something for families or for people that are in a similar predicament? I think what it was is when she died, we realized that whilst we had a lifetime of wonderful memories, there was nothing really tangible or anywhere to go to gather those things. We've got the odd couple of pictures, and we've actually found one video since of her dancing in this sort of birthday celebration, I think it was. But that's it. So nothing really much. And we thought, we don't really do this in family circles. There's social media, of course, which is public. And there are ways and means to capture different things. But when my son said this, the light bulb went. And, as I say, I've been working in health and social care for 20 years. I reached out to people. And whilst there's lots of clinical systems in place, there wasn't really anything for the individual. And that was really where we were looking at initially, that end of life space, really.
I love that. As you were talking, I was reflecting on too, thinking back to, I don't know if you've seen it at all, and I've referenced it a couple times in blog posts and things, but have you seen or heard of the Netflix docuseries Surviving Death?
I haven't. We have a similar, I don't know if it's similar at all, but Ricky Gervais has a Netflix series, Afterlife.
Oh.
And I only sort of become aware of it, I guess, in the last 6 or 12 months. But certainly, someone pointed out to me that, oh my gosh, your app looks similar to Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. And when you watch the series, you'll see his wife has created these videos for him for when she's gone. Mm-hmm. You don't forget to do the washing on this degree, and don't forget that you'll need to, redo the insurance or renew the insurance on this date, and little things that will help him assist. But obviously from his grief perspective, he's constantly looking at these videos, just to sort of stay in touch, I guess, with his wife. But I've not seen the other one that you mentioned, no.
Yeah, it's only 6 episodes, but every episode is a different aspect of end of life. So there's a couple episodes on talking about mediums. There's one on reincarnation. There's one specifically on end of life, like seeing like the visions and things that people see towards the end of life. Yeah, it's very good if you're into that sort of thing.
I am.
Yeah,
I should certainly take a look.
yeah, I think you would like it. I think you would like it. But yeah, and I know we had talked briefly before, but going into end of life doula training coming up soon, I can see where this would be such a value piece that I can mention and give as a resource for loved ones too. Because is this correct? It's almost like it can be like a family group chat type sort of thing too.
Sort of. I mean, that's certainly where we're going right now. The individual can invite people into their circle, so that closed group setting, so it's secure, but it's invite only. So as an individual, download the app, and then you invite your relatives into your circle. And you can do, that works both ways, of course. But what we've also built into the app is the ability for a companion. So there are essentially 3 user types currently, anyway, 3 user types. So you've got the individual patient, the loved one, a family member, and then a companion. And that companion effectively is a doula or end-of-life practitioner that can assist with, helping someone with their content if they've not got the ability to do it themselves. And interestingly, I was last March, I was invited onto one of the basic doula foundation courses here in the UK. So I've kind of been through that process myself, and it was all new to me. I have to say, I was very emotional as well. To just to learn to go through those processes. I was very fortunate to be invited by Felicity Warner, who runs Soul Midwives here in the UK, and it was fascinating. I'd never actually heard the term doula before in my life, so it was new to me.
I actually hadn't either.
No. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I saw the term death doula, and I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, what's a death doula?
It does sound harsh, doesn't it?
It does.
Even to me now, I find it harsh, which is why I say end-of-life practitioner, because it's got that gentle kind of tone to it. But yeah, death doula. So it was new to me. As I say, they call them soul midwives, soul companions, and other things here in the UK. But yeah, completely enlightened by it, actually.
Can we bring up a little bit about, because you touched on it before we started to record, but I'm interested in like the cultural differences, because you're in the UK.
I am.
And you kind of touched on a little bit about how, the culture there is a little bit stiff upper lip when it comes to feelings and emotions. And I can tell you, being in German country, it's no different. I'm in the German heritage background area, and it's no different. But I'm curious how that has played out in your grief.
Yeah, just a quick question there then. Können Sie Deutsch sprechen auch, oder?
Just a little bit.
Ganz bisschen.
Just a little bit. I can say ich liebe dich. I love you.
ich liebe dich, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I lived in Germany for a little bit, which is why I asked the question.
Oh, but, I've been there.
Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I find it, I've been having these conversations now across the globe, really, in relation to AfterCloud, with end-of-life practitioners, clinicians, lots of different people that are involved in end-of-life care or dementia care or palliative care in the community. And culturally, I find it a little bit more advanced in Australia and the US and Canada, predominantly. I think those 3 markets really are leading in terms of that interdisciplinary approach to end of life care. So that holistic kind of joined up approach. I think they're a little bit more forward. In the UK, I think we're a little bit behind the curve. Cecily Saunders obviously created hospice care here in the UK, and that model has now been reflected, across the globe. But I think we're very much practitioner or clinician led at end of life in the UK. And we've got a little bit of catching up to do with, I think, sometimes just letting go and letting people who have that compassion or that empathy to apply practical end of life experiences, both for the individual and for family members. But that's a personal opinion. There'll be a lot that disagree with that, and that's for them to disagree with. But I think having these conversations, you do get a sense of where the community, I don't like calling it a market, but certainly the community is leading and paving the way. And as I say, Australia, Canada, USA, for sure.
There is a doctor too on that Surviving Death series, a researcher, and he's very much academic, but he mentions he's in Europe, and I want to say he's in the UK as well, but in Europe, I can't remember exactly where, but he does mention that too, how it's this very, death is like this, it's almost, I don't know, I can't even explain how I'm not sure how he worded it, so I'd get it wrong no matter what I'd say, but alluded to the same thing you did anyway.
Yeah, well, I think we class it as the unspoken word. I mean, even now, we have a guest blog called the D Word, just to allude to it. And there's a UK health radio show called the D Word as well, because I think we don't use that word. And part of our process, certainly part of what we see as our responsibility for AfterCloud, is that we normalize it. We normalize the word. And this is something I found out as well through conversation, but round the bend, if you're going round the bend, that's an old phrase for mental illness. And that's because in Victorian times, they placed those hospices, let's call them hospitals, we'll call them hospitals, but they placed them around the bend, so they were out of the way, out of eyesight from the general population. And that meant, if you were going around the bend, you were going to a mental institution. And again, it's that sort of Victorian, again, I think morbidity as an example. So if someone died back in the Victorian era, you were aware of someone grieving because they were all in black. They were dressed in black. The curtains would be shut. Whereas we don't have that now. Nowadays, you don't know if someone's grieving unless they tell you specifically. We don't mourn the way we used to mourn, with the curtains shut and wearing black. Times are changing, and as I say, I think this period that we've all found ourselves in, or we found ourselves in through COVID, as I've already said, but mentioned that everybody is now fully implicitly aware of their own mortality, because it's been presented to us by the media, front and center stage in a multitude of colors. And I think that it's horrid time as it may be, but I think it's lessened the impact of the word death. And it's starting to normalize the conversation for the general population.
And one of my missions too, starting this podcast, was to help society talk about grief like we talk about the weather. It's in that intro, because it is about normalizing it and hearing other people's stories, and that's how we relate, is through story, and we see ourselves in other people's stories. And if people feel a sense of hope after they listen to someone's story on my podcast, that's really what I'm shooting for. So your app could be hope for someone who's in the process or experiencing, someone who's going through a terminal illness, or like dementia or something like that. Can we go?
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say that's an interesting one as well, because when we started this journey, as I mentioned, it was from a grief place. It was initially directed at end of life. And when we started our early discussions with people in hospice care or in palliative care in the community, they don't want to talk about death. They're aware of the process they're going through, but they absolutely don't want to talk about death or that journey. People with dementia are aware that they're losing their memory slowly but surely, and they're more than happy to talk about that journey, and they're more than happy to have those conversations and have the appropriate planning in place. So I've found that fascinating myself, actually. Just those two trails of thought. So we have slightly realigned it to open it up to more of a life tech kind of app, because I have give you two instances, interestingly. One doula in the States that 2 weeks into the beta became a grandmother. So her daughter started capturing moments within AfterCloud in the beta form of that process. So there's a child there in the States that is now 15 weeks old that is being captured, or her moments are being captured. The really important moments are being captured, which is fantastic. We have another doula, Karen, in New Zealand, who said, actually, I'm going to turn this around and show my parents how they've impacted my life, not the other way around. So we see it more of a life tech app, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We don't know when our time is up, right?
No, we really don't.
Know.
No. I've been posting more recently, actually, is, what if today is your last day? What if there are no more tomorrows? It's kind of a little bit like, I don't like phrasing it like this, but in insurance, it's kind of, I want to create those moments or write those letters that I want to write before it's too late. So let's do it. Let's just put them, or at least start capturing them. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's like you said, it could be a way to document your life.
Yeah, we've got people that are journaling, storytelling, as I say, art therapy, music therapy. Music is fascinating because with the music therapists that we're working with, in fact, one in particular, actually, Sandra, who's in Ireland, she shows album covers to her to the patients in the hospital. It's actually a nursing home, but she shows them album covers, and of course, it instinctively takes them back to that day that they might have played the album with their friends or family. And then she'll pick a track from the album and play the track for them, and again, it invokes those emotions that they had at that time. So straight away, it takes them back to that occasion, and of course, it can be captured there and then and shared with family and friends. We're doing a bit of work in VR as well, because VR does a similar thing. Virtual reality headsets where it can take someone back to a time or a place or location and really invoke those memories. There's a lot of research actually taking place in that area now from a psychological perspective. So the potential is that we're working with various universities from a psychology perspective on that process. I mean, it's early days yet, but that's certainly where it's going, I think.
Dr. Chris Kerr, he is in the Surviving Death series, and he's a palliative hospice care doctor, and so he had done a lot of research in end of life experiences of his patients and documented what they were seeing and experiencing leading up to, as they were beginning their transition with terminal illness.
Yeah.
And he actually referenced something what you had just said something, and that made me think of that. But he has in his TED talk, he talks about an older gentleman who's dying, and he was a soldier. He was in World War II, and one of his visions was it was very traumatic for him. He was having these flashbacks because his job was to transport the bodies. And so his visions were really traumatic. And then they switched, and a soldier came to him and said, "Soon they will be coming for you." But it was a very comforting thing. And the horrible vision stopped, the horrible dream stopped, and suddenly he felt comforted by his comrades who were coming for him.
Wow.
It's just a really beautiful illustration of how the deeply rooted pains in our hearts come back to us as we're transitioning to heal us in a way, spiritually, on a soul level.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go very deep there, but
I think,
yeah, it just made me think of that. I don't know why.
Well, no, I think talking about trauma, I think there's going to be a lot of trauma-related, post-traumatic stress disorder from frontline workers. They've been going through, well, hell. I don't like to say that, but the sheer amount of work and exhaustion that they're seeing currently, and this is, everybody that's involved in that provision of care they're exhausted. And what a fantastic job they're all doing. It's just incredible. But I do foresee a huge need for them to be supported when we do eventually come out of this horrible time. I think it's imperative that they get the support, whether it's holidays or, rest and recuperation, as we used to call it in the forces. You'll know that. I think it's fundamentally important that they're supported in this best way they can possibly be supported, because they've been doing a tremendous job. But I think so. Post-traumatic stress, I know whether or not that comes to the fore through grief as well. Again, I don't know, but you're probably best placed to tell me.
Yeah, in grief recovery, we say that trauma is what happens and grief is what's left.
Yeah. And I think that's shock as well.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. My dog wants out. 1 second.
No problem.
Okay.
I'm just going to get a bottle of water.
Sure. So I'm curious then, how are you using this app in your life?
And that's a great question, because we are so close to it. Most of the time it was test. So test. And I've been capturing all sorts of things. Just yesterday, as an example, we went out for quite a lengthy walk in the countryside, just to get that fresh air. I mean, it's cold, but just to get that fresh air. But we took some video footage there and then. What we tend to do, though, is we post it for the following day or within a few days, which is great. I mean, it's still there. It's in draft or it's published. It's either or. But we have that content. And again, my wife actually wanted me to give my son a piggyback, just again capture that sort of moment really of being so we do things like that as family, but most of the time it's actually test, as opposed to sort of my life moments. I think that's because I'm really, really close to the app, I guess. But I have written letters. Just to give an example, within the app itself, you can, so to create a moment, you can upload an image. You can upload a video or take a video in app. You can record your voice. You can write or dictate a letter, or all of those things combined to make a moment. So what we say to people is, imagine you've got an old photo. Well, that's great. That's an old photo, but what memories does it invoke? Tell us about the time that happened. And of course you can embellish that with an audio or or a letter if you wanted to, just to explain it. I mean, we've got, I digress away from the question, but we've got people that now, one patient that's in our working group, his mum gave him some recipes. And so he wants to maintain the family recipes and give them to his kids. He's also writing goodbye letters as well. They don't want to call it goodbye letters. I spoke to somebody else about this last week. And maybe they should be hello letters and not goodbye letters. So again, it's just a different take on it. But you can use it for all sorts of things. We are ourselves capturing video, really, and audio, a little bit of audio as well, because again, it's the voice. That strapline that we have on our website, it's her voice I miss the most. I wish I could hear her again. Those words are actually from one of our board advisors, Roberta Ricella, who she's head of quality of life in HC1. It's sort of one of the largest residential providers here in the UK. But she lost her mum at a very young age, I guess similar to yourself. And I think she was 12, but she had a tape recording of a voicemail of her mum, and she lost the tape. And that's a story in itself. In fact, Roberta's going to be writing for us later in the year as a guest blog, all about that journey and all about that story. But when I started speaking to Roberta about this, and she told me this, I wrote it down, and it just, it encapsulates everything that AfterCloud is about. It's her voice I miss the most. I wish I could hear her again. And of course you can with AfterCloud. If you capture it now, it's there for posterity. It's there for future generations. But that's her story.
Yeah. Well, and I can say too, I would love to hear my dad's voice.
Do you have many memories? Do you have, footage or?
There's no video, and all of I maybe have 10 pictures.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, sorry.
My question though is too, I can see this as being something helpful for busy moms with young kids that may not necessarily have maybe the financial means to purchase a nice camera or video, like a video camera or something like that. And we all have our phones, but you got your pictures in one app, you got your videos that, for someone who might be terrible about printing, okay, because I was a photographer, and my youngest always reminds me that she's got no baby book and her siblings have like a baby book and a scrapbook. But yeah, the printing thing is an issue for me. So how does that, I'm asking for myself. So to document my children's birthdays or school concert or an accomplishment or something like that, how does that work? Like, how can you print from it? And how do you, is it a monthly subscription? Like, how does that work? Like, do you have access as long as you are a subscriber, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Victoria. So I'll answer the first question, or the first part of the question first, and then I'll come on to subscriptions. So printing, it's just, well, as an example, you have your phone. You mentioned already, you can print from phone, just by hooking it up with a USB or whatever. You can do that for sure. All of those moments you capture in app. So as I say, whether it's an image, a video, voice, or a letter, and letters can be dictated in app as well. So you can speak to the app and it will dictate your letter. You might have to edit little bits depending upon, your voice or accent or tonation, but you can do all that in app. So that's the first thing, to create that moment, or multiple content types to create the moment. In relation to the subscription model, yes. So it will be free. There will be a free base version for everybody to make use of. Absolutely. Really, really imperative to us that there was that free model for people to utilize. But then, depending upon your needs and requirements, we embellish that product range as a subscription-based model, but again, very, very affordable subscription-based model. And of course, that's not released yet. It won't be released now, I don't think, until about May time,
Okay.
which possibly might coincide with the air date of this podcast.
Yeah, it will.
But that's the sort of timeline we're looking at the moment. The beta is currently 15 weeks in trial. Fantastic feedback. In fact, we've just Friday had our first video interview, which is a dementia patient who's also a patient advocate, and he loves it. He thinks it's fantastic for dementia patients, which I'm really, really proud of, actually, I have to say. It's just, yeah, the fact that it's doing something positive for someone, yeah, it's tremendous. But yeah, subscription-based model, depending upon needs and requirements. I think from an ethical standpoint, we're only going to guarantee 10 years. And I mean that in a genuine way, in that I think it would be wrong of us to stipulate lifelong or 99 years. Or, you know, I am aware of another platform that's got this 99 years. And I think, well, how can you absolutely say that? Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? But certainly 10 years, I think, is a generalization. And you can capture today. So going back to the anniversaries and the birthdays and those scenarios that you mentioned, I mentioned already, my mum's birthday is in September and she's going to be 81. I could record a video message today and publish it for the 1st of September, which is my mum's birthday, knowing that she's going to get that on her birthday and not before.
Oh, that's a neat. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah,
Keeps you from forgetting, and especially those first of the month birthdays that kind of sneak up on you and you flip the calendar and it's like, shoot.
It's one of those things you can do whenever you feel comfortable about doing it and not have to worry about it again. You know, it's but yeah, I think if you know your daughter's play at school, absolutely capturing in the app, take a video or different types of content, however you want to do that, and then it will be saved as a draft, but you can publish it, and you can publish it to your daughter if you wanted to, or you can publish it to yourself, either the following day or any time in the future, knowing full well it will be there, captured and safe in the cloud, as in AfterCloud. Yeah.
So tell me about the name.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was actually my CTO, Anthony, who came up with the name AfterCloud, which I thought was fantastic. It sort of, we were toying with Treasured for a while, as in, you know, a box full of treasures. And we were toying about with the name initially. For us, it was imperative that every stakeholder was catered for. So not only the individual, but also the loved one. So we have this grief cafe as well as a support mechanism. It's a community-based support mechanism, so free to attend once a month, and is actually growing as a community. But the name AfterCloud was, as I say, we were just chatting away one day over a coffee, talking about the app, talking about iterations of the app. So before lockdown, so this was last sort of February time, he said the word AfterCloud, and as soon as he said it, I kind of wrote it down and said, that is it. That's just fantastic. AfterCloud, that's it. Yeah, and it's been AfterCloud since. It was called My AfterCloud because of the URL. But then we realized actually the URL can remain My AfterCloud because it's yours, but the app itself is AfterCloud.
Well, and if you have a group, it's kind of our AfterCloud.
It could
not necessarily my.
Our AfterCloud, yeah. It's everybody's AfterCloud. I think that's another, yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah.
So let's bring back the story to your mother-in-law and that experience, and what, I mean, you kind of spoke to what prompted the creation of the app, but yeah. Do you care to speak more about that loss?
Yeah, I think it was really the first grief journey that I've had close to us, I guess, in quite a while. I mean, my dad died. My dad suffered from cancer. I think when I was 6 months old, they gave him 6 weeks to live.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No, it's part of life, isn't it? And I think if I look at my life, actually, talking about grief, I lost my mum. I didn't lose my mum. My mum lost her son. So I was 4 years old, and my older brother, I had two older brothers, and I lost one of my older brothers through a road traffic accident. He was knocked over by a car, and he was only 7 at the time. So the trauma that she went through as a mum, I just can't imagine. I wouldn't want to imagine, but I know that she was heavily traumatized at the time. But she had a child, or 2 children, an older one and a younger one to take care of, and kind of got on with life, I guess, in that respect. But my dad, as I say, cancer really lifelong, from the time I was born. But as I say, 6 months old, they gave him 6 weeks to live. And he turned and said to my mum, she will vouch for me when she says this, well, I'm not going to go anywhere yet. I'm going to wait till my kids are old enough to look after themselves. And he did. We all grew up. He went through radiation. He lost his bottom jaw.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was really one of the very early pioneers of radiation treatment for cancer therapy, cancer of the throat. And, but also skin grafts and things like that. I mean, skin grafts and operation after operation, and trying to, put his face back together, really, I guess, but none of that worked. And
was he able to talk?
He was able to talk. I could understand him, whatever he said. And I think that's why he liked having me around from time to time, and I mentioned to you before, I went off and joined the army and came back, and he was, he wouldn't go out much because people would stare. But with me, he'd feel protected, I guess, to an extent. So that was nice. But so, I guess my grief journey has been lifelong. I think that, my mother-in-law dying 2 years ago impacted more, I think, on my wife. It's really her first major loss. She did lose her dad, again, through cancer, fair few years back. But I think losing her mum through such an aggressive disease as Lewy body dementia is, well, it was in this occasion. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I know people that have Lewy body dementia that had it for 10 years and are still living well, even though there is a cognitive decline. But through this, it was very, very quick. And so my wife, I think it's impacted my wife more, and still does, because grief, as you know, is a lifelong journey. And as my son as well, because it was him that, sparked this interest about AfterCloud. Again, I can't really take full credit or responsibility for it. It was he was the one that sort of intimated it. Wouldn't it be great if we could do something for other people in a similar predicament? So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I could talk more with the loss of your father, because it just fascinates me that he was able to survive that long. But I just want to highlight, though, and just kind of reflect back to you that if he never left the house, or he, wouldn't leave the house, that would have, that alone restricted the experiences you could have had with him too, not?
I think it probably did, but he did. I mean, he worked, even with, with his facial disfigurement, he worked. He carried on. He was ex-soldier himself, but he carried on working, you know, and he worked in a college. And I would imagine that he'd probably get stared at time and time and time and time again. I think what he didn't do was go out sociably, you know, restaurants or in those types of environment. He would go to work and come home, and, you know, I'd sit up and watch him come in. And in that sense, everything was quite normal. And I didn't know anything different apart from, you know, he was my dad. And as I say, I found it easy to comprehend and understand him because I'd always known him. But for other people, they would struggle. And I think towards the latter part of his life, it was worse. But I think that's because he maybe got lazy. I don't know. I think maybe just, you know, there comes a point when you just, I'm not going to repeat myself again because I've already said that once. But I got it straight away. I knew what he was saying. He kind of, you know, yeah. But as I say, I didn't know anything different, I guess.
I suppose if you were pretty much born into that experience, you wouldn't.
Yeah. No.
Can you make the distinction too of Lewy body dementia versus like dementia that maybe most people are familiar with?
I'm not an expert in any way, shape or form in dementia or Alzheimer's or any related disease, only that with my mother-in-law, when I say aggressive, 2 years probably from that initial, okay, something's not quite right here, to death. And in that sense, it was quick. And I think latterly, those last sort of few months, we were, so my wife and my sister-in-law were sort of caring. They were, you know, caring for my mother-in-law, the primary carers essentially. And we were sharing that responsibility between us as families. So, you know, Mum would spend a little bit of time in our house here, and then we'd drive, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours, and swap over the roles, just to give each other a bit of respite, because it is, you know, it's hard work. Well, I mean, you care with empathy and compassion. It's my mother-in-law, but my wife probably needed that break every 2 or 3 weeks, you know.
Because you're grieving during that process too, because you're losing a little bit of that person every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's,
yeah. And I look back now and I wish we'd have had AfterCloud then, really. And that's not a plug. It's just, if we'd have captured some of those moments. I remember vividly walking, you know, my mother-in-law at the front of our house, just up and down the road. Because slowly but surely she was losing the ability to do that. So we'd do that, and I'd give her a bar of chocolate. She loved eating chocolate. So I'd say, you know, there's a bit of chocolate, and let's go out for one. Her face would light up because she knew that, you know, there was a reward at the end of it for chocolate, you know. And I know it sounds harsh, but it was a great way of kind of maintaining that ability to do something. And of course that slowly declined as well. But I guess towards the end, anything we could do with whether it was a small pot of yogurt or a chocolate-based mousse or something, because you start to lose, I think with Lewy body anyway, you start to lose that cognitive ability to swallow, to taste, to you know, function. And of course, if that's happening, you can see it physically on the outside. Internally, it must be a whole heap worse. And of course, it's a steady regression. It's a steady decline. As I say, I'm not an expert, far from it, but I do talk to experts, and I do talk to a lot of people that are, you know, providing specialist dementia-based care. So I kind of learn little bits here and there.
I worked in a nursing home when I was a teenager, and there was a devoted Alzheimer's unit specifically for Alzheimer's residents. Yeah, I can't imagine what that is like to care for someone, a loved one that's you're losing a little bit of every day. I
Mm,
mean, the grieving starts, and I think that's true with terminal illness too. You know what's coming, you know, but
yeah,
at least with terminal illness, you have that cognitive. It doesn't
ability.
come in and out.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
We're doing for some fascinating work in older people's services down with, um, virtual reality headsets
Mm.
and taking people back to those moments in time where they can enjoy themselves. So even when they've not got a tremendous amount of cognitive ability, they might be sat in a chair, as an example, in a nursing home, they can still be taken back to that magical moment,
Mm-hmm.
and you can still put a smile on their face. I love that. I mean, that for me is just heartwarming. I all of those things, the more we can do for people, the more we can just have that empathy and compassion and put the smile back on their face, the better, in my view. And I'm all
Nurture
for,
the dignity.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, what has your grief experiences taught you?
Oh, that's a question. Ah, um, for me, I think it's just having that understanding, really, and even more so for employers. Interesting. I mean, we posted a blog post just recently, and I wrote a personal piece about the actual guest post because I experienced grief in the workplace in a corporate environment, and nobody knew, nobody understood, nobody even asked. Actually, they couldn't really care, and I'm sure they could if they had known, but they didn't necessarily
Mm.
care. And I think it's a duty of all employers to have the duty of care, really, for their employers. If you've got someone that is bereaved or in a state of shock through grief, they're not going to be performing at their best, are they? They're not going to be producing the goods, so to speak, or the numbers. And so the one thing I've learned is, as an employer, to have that respect, to give people the time that they need and the space they need, I think, to grieve. And that's different for everybody, or at least the support mechanisms to assist people to grieve. Because again, I think that is something that's missing, I think, really, in the modern workplace. And of course, we're all grieving now, aren't we? Not through bereavement, but just grief of loss. We're grieving for the little simple pleasures that we once took for granted. I mean, wouldn't it be great just to go to a coffee shop and have a coffee and sit down with a slice of cake? I mean, that just that
Mm.
simple pleasure.
Yeah, sit in a coffee shop. Yeah.
We can't do it. We're in lockdown. Well, in the UK, certainly we're in lockdown. Everything's shut. And this is now the third lockdown that we've had. And I think from a mental perspective as well, so mental health and well-being, it's going to affect people, isn't it? I think there's going to be fallout from that.
Well, you
So
get in
yeah,
this rut of this is never going to end. Like
it
you don't
feels like
see
that.
the light. Yeah, you don't feel or see this light at the end of the tunnel. And I just want to highlight the point that you said about employers because thank you for saying that. Um, and I think it's looking at that role that you play as an employer as one with compassion and empathy because I gave a talk actually to my company about grief and bereavement. And, most employers only offer 4 days
Mm,
of bereavement time.
mm,
4 days.
yeah.
All right,
See,
back at it. Lickety
I
split. Let's
know
get
it's
going. Like,
madness, absolute madness. I think really for me, in a corporate environment, and I'm talking, large employers that have, an extensive workforce, there should be an appropriately qualified bereavement officer. We call it a chief bereavement officer. Got chief information officers, chief executive officers. They've got chief financial officers. They've got chief officers for everything, but not bereavement. Why?
maybe I should pitch myself to my company,
Hey, why not? Yeah,
create my
yeah,
own job within the
yeah,
company. That'd be
yeah.
great.
But I think it's I think employers need to take responsibility. They take responsibility in every other aspect of our life. They pay us our wages and et cetera, et cetera. There needs to be ownership, I think, in terms of grief as well, to get the
It's
best
just,
from your workforce.
yeah, it's just caring.
Mm,
It's just caring.
it really is being human.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kindness and
yeah,
caring. Go
yeah,
back to the basics. Like,
yeah,
think of it. Empathy is like the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
sure.
What would you need?
Yeah,
What would you hope for?
yeah,
And I think too, that's where I'm glad the conversation around grief is starting to change, that people are talking about it more, because more people then gain an understanding that it's not about picking yourself up from your bootstraps and, you know, driving on. And it's just a part of life, you know, that life, death, life, it, you know, we're all going to die, you know,
that's right.
this cold, disconnected approach to our mortality. But also then that's also looking at other people's losses that way as well. It's
Mm.
distancing yourself from being vulnerable with someone, getting in that space with them, being comfortable getting in that space with them. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable doing that because they haven't connected within themselves and what they have lost.
Yeah, that's fascinating, you know, because I think you mentioned the here and now and having those meaningful conversations. It absolutely is about that. I started to well up when I was talking about my dad, you know, and taking him out. And of course, there's that emotion, because it took me right back to that of how he must feel. Yeah, so that's something I've got to look at, I think, inwardly
Mm.
too, because it kind of invokes that emotion. Yeah, yeah. But no, having those meaningful conversations, being in the here and now, present as a human to human, I think is really, really important for everybody. Really, really. Mm.
So during those days when it was really difficult for your wife, for your family,
Yeah.
I kind of like to ask too, like what does give you joy? Like what in all the grief that you've experienced throughout your grief experience, what is giving you the most joy and hope for the future?
I think it's the simple things, in truth. I think it's the little things that we just probably take for granted. My son, as an example, turns 13 this week. That gives us joy. No idea where the time's gone. But my wife and I have been planning meticulously to try and do something nice for them. I mean, it's a different world they're living in, the kids. I fear for them in terms of their mental stability as well, because they're not seeing friends at school. They're not having those interactions that we had as kids. But I am very, very thankful for technology. He's a gamer, and there's a little clique of gamers that pretty much daily, certainly after school when the work's done, they will all just they'll play ship, ship Ship of Thieves or Minecraft or one of those, one of the
Yeah.
games.
My son is too, yeah.
Yeah, so it's beyond me. But again, just talking to parents as well is, thank goodness they've got that. They've still got that ability to connect with each other, even virtually, in this type of environment. But they're still, problem solving, as an example, in games.
Mm-hmm.
They're still using that sort of similar behavior to problem solve, which is fantastic. I see it as a benefit. Whether my wife agrees with me on that, I don't know. But yeah, I see it as a benefit. But going back to your question, I think just the little things, really, what gives us joy. For me, seeing a smile on my wife's face, knowing she's grieving, knowing she's still going through those hardships that grief journey can take you down or on. And it has its peaks and troughs, and you'll know this yourself, it up and down, depending upon scenario. But it's understanding that and having empathy for that, really, and not reacting. Or at least understanding that it's probably grief that is doing this. But yeah, I think just knowing that there will be a time when we do get back to normality of some description. That's something to look forward to, I think, for all of us. Yeah. And hope for the future. You know, hope that, you know, people will have more empathy when we come out of this. I've seen it myself during this time that people have been a lot more connected. Families have been more connected more than ever, actually, even in a virtual environment. You know, that when we had the first lockdown, you saw families having quiz nights together. I mean, they're not as common now, actually, but initially having quiz nights, that was never even thought of before. None of us did this as families. Families were quite disconnected, unless it was a wedding or a funeral or some kind of family celebration. You wouldn't just connect, really. Now, as an example, I phone my mum every day. I speak to her every day. I can see her every day on my video on phone. She uses AfterCloud, interestingly, so she's writing things for me. But I'll connect with my brothers. So I've got two brothers, a younger and an older. I mentioned we lost the one. But my younger brother, there was 9 years between us, and there's 6 years to my older brother. But we'll all get together on a chat with my mum. We'd never done that ever before. And had it not have been for this time, I don't think we ever would. So there are some good things that have come out of this as well, I think. And I think that connectivity, that humanity, compassion, that kindness that we've all seen, I hope that carries on. I hope it continues. I hope that people don't lose that. Yeah.
Let that be the virus that spreads, right?
I'm going to write that down. That's brilliant.
Quote me on that then.
I will indeed. I will quote you on that. That's fantastic.
Let joy and love be the virus that spreads. Yeah, I might have.
Yeah, that's a Twitter, isn't it? That's a kind of tweet, I think, that comes out of this. Yeah, I think you put some more. I'm going to leave that for you. That's your quote, and I think it's a fantastic quote, Victoria.
Well, you can put it anywhere and just put my name on it. That's fine.
I could do indeed. Let joy and love be the virus.
Or may joy and love. May joy and love be the virus.
May joy and love be the virus
that
spreads post-pandemic.
No, just overall. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a lovely thought. But as I say, just that compassion, that empathy. I mentioned earlier that I've been volunteering since the outbreak. So just in my local community, and I live in a small village, and we have so many volunteers that give their time freely to help others. And I don't think we'd have seen that had it not have been for a pandemic. So again, I hope that continues. I hope that human connectivity continues, because I love it. I just, yeah.
Thank you for the work that you do.
No, thank you for yours. I think having these conversations is really, really important. I think it's really, really important. And yeah, God bless you as well.
Thank you. So where can people reach you if they'd like to connect with you?
Okay, great. I'm on LinkedIn, Darren Evans. They can email me, Darren@Delogic. That's DYLOGIC.co.uk. My son's name is Dylan, hence the Delogic, because he's always applying it. Has been from a young age. The website is my AfterCloud, all one word. So my aftercloud.com. And again, you can register on the site. And the app is downloadable through the App Store. So AfterCloud is an app on iOS and Android.
I will link all of that in the show notes as well. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, just that you've been great. Can't thank you enough for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I think the conversation will definitely continue.
Yeah, I genuinely hope it does. And from me to you, I wish you well with your endeavors as well. Notwithstanding the doula.
Oh, thank you so much. I very much look forward to it. I'm not sure how it's gonna play out in
Oh,
my
you'll be great.
area, but yeah, thank
You'll
you
be
so much.
fantastic. No, it's a pleasure. And let's keep in touch.
Definitely. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.